Professor Benjamin Rosman, I'm very excited about this interview. You're part of the Time 100 AI 25. What does that really mean?
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks so much. Means I was chosen by Time magazine put forward as one of the 100 most influential people in AI this year. Globally, yeah.
I'm going to start with the easy questions, right? And then you're going to give us both sides of the divide when I ask the more difficult questions about AI.
Got it.
But your own interest, you've been in the field of computing and applied mathematics, and then your work in AI, how did it develop?
So, kind of rewinding back in my life to when I was at school, I was really interested in computers and particularly games, as I think many people are. And I was really excited about this idea that you could even design games. And to me, it was almost like you could build worlds and decide, narratives and what happens. This was something I found fascinating. And so I got really into programming at quite a young age. And it was obvious to me that if I wanted to go and work on games, I should become a computer scientist. So I went to Wits University and I studied computer science there, and along the way picked up a few other things, maths and particularly applied maths. And I thought all of this was really cool, but these things, in a way, had very little to do with each other. It was just, interesting. Kind of as I was going through my studies, this idea of AI, which had been around for a while, but there wasn't a lot going on here, was introduced to us in some of our courses, really towards the end, and I thought, wow, this is so cool. It first made sense from the gaming perspective of, if you're in a game and there's different characters you want to interact with, you should be thinking about how they do this. But then I found that this idea of actually thinking about intelligence was just super fascinating, and I just became fixated on this, and so I wanted to go further into it. At the time, there really wasn't much happening locally, and so I had to go abroad to work on that, and I did a master's, and there was a strong element of robotics, and with that I found actually all these courses I'd studied before suddenly fit together, and everything I'd done just made sense, and I knew I'd found the right thing, and this just opened the pathway that ended up being my PhD, and then eventually my career built out of that.
Well, as you just said, AI has been around for a while. It's been around since the 50s, but certainly it hasn't been as adopted, and there hasn't been as much investment as there is right now, and yet it's still nascent to a degree. We've seen DeepSeek, we've seen, saying goodbye to ChatGPT-4, but certainly technologically, I would say, maybe ever, has been as widely and swiftly adopted as AI. Why do you think that is?
So that's definitely true. I think it's kind of the fastest growing field in human history. Apparently, academically, there's something like 500 publications a day at this point in AI. And that moment when it all happened, that kind of ChatGPT moment, which was when the world started paying attention, that was kind of crazy. And I think, it came from the field had been bubbling below the surface for, as you say, since the 50s. But I think we had a couple of things happening. One, that what we'd seen with AI before was really what we always thought of as narrow AI, like something that's very good at a specific thing, whether that was navigating you around using your maps or playing chess, something like that. But suddenly you have a tool that is kind of quite general in what it can do, but also you can kind of relate to it. You can communicate with it without programming. It was in what we say as weird computer scientists, natural language. So you've got this thing that suddenly was available online. You didn't have to pay for it, well, for the free versions at least.
Sure.
You could talk to it as you talk to anyone else in a chat environment.
I don't have to be a programmer.
Exactly. But it could also do anything from like maths problems through to writing poetry for you. And I think just the potential there, that spark just appealed to so many people. And that's what we've seen since then, that everyone's kind of finding their own niches and their use cases. And I think really that generality let it explode in the way it had.
I want to talk firstly about your own work, right, at WITS. So Lalapa AI, the deep learning in Daba, and then I've got a lot of questions about mind. But first, tell me about Lalapa and the other one.
Okay, so first I'll take back to the research that I do at WITS. So I'm based in the School of Computer Science and Applied Maths, and there I run a research lab called the RAIL Lab, the Robotics, Autonomous Intelligence and Learning Lab. So this is really focused on kind of particular area in AI, which is about autonomous decision making. So, often what we think about as AI is something that's communicating with us via text, but really the what I see as the core problem is making decisions, right? And these could be decisions like, what do I eat? This could be decisions, kind of big life decisions, but it could also be, how should my robot go around in my house and make me a cup of coffee, right? All of these require the same kind of process where I've got to make a sequence of decisions, and this could be put my foot here and then my foot there and then open the door. It could be exactly how I should move my arms and legs. It could be, should I be buying and selling things in stock portfolios? Like, all of these are what we call these sequential decision-making problems. Now, these are difficult because, if I'm trying to make my cup of coffee, where I put my foot next isn't really of any consequence, right? But it does affect what I do straight after that and straight after that. Sometimes it has a consequence. If I slip and fall down the stairs, then I know something bad has happened. And if I end up with my coffee, I know something good has happened. But by and large, I've got to kind of make sense of the world. This is the process we go through kind of when we're born, from kind of being babies through to kids and adults, kind of learning how to operate in our environment. So this is the kind of problem that we focus on in my lab. And really, this is a difficult problem. We look at ways that can speed it up, make it more general, and also importantly safer, so that it does what we intend it to do. And I'm sure we'll talk more about the safety aspects later on. So this is the kind of work that we do in my lab at WITS. We do a lot of work in robotics as well. Everything from kind of how do robots make decisions to actually putting them out in the field and getting them to work on hard problems. We've got a problem at the moment putting them into the Sterkfontein caves to help other scientists with the work that they're doing there. So this is the core of my work. But a second piece of what I'm really passionate about is Africa and the African community. And this led me, with a group of other people back in 2017, to start something which is now called the Deep Learning in Daba. And we had this idea. There was a group of 8 of us originally that had studied abroad or were working abroad in the tech space, and we wanted to do something to give back to our community. We thought, let's do a kind of deep dive technical workshop for a week, and maybe we'll find 30 people in all of Africa who would care about this. So we held the event in August in 2017 at WITS.
You got a lot more than 30 people.
We did. We got 330 people, and it's just kind of snowballed since then. So now the most recent one was held in Rwanda a few weeks ago. We had about 1,300 people there. We support satellite events in 47 African countries. It's just become this huge kind of grassroots movement across the continent, just giving us a voice in the AI space. Off the back of that, one of the big areas that emerged as being important in Africa was African languages. And being able to, most of the way AI works requires that there's a lot of data that's out there. And for the 2,000 plus languages spoken in Africa, most of them don't have a lot of data. And so what that means is the kind of standard paradigms that we use to build these AI models aren't well suited to African languages. And a lot of people no one had really put effort into this. So out of the Indaba became a kind of subgroup called Masakane, which was a group spread across Africa focused on thinking about these African, what we call natural language processing, building these tools. And from that, we formed this company, Lalapa AI, with 6 of us who did that, which is really dedicated to building AI for Africans by Africans.
I imagine when I went to varsity a long time ago, everybody wanted to either get a CA or become a lawyer. And just a quick shout out to my friend Prof. Stevens, who got us together for this interview. But are you finding that there are tons and tons of kids out of matric now want to join your course of study.
Oh, it's crazy. I mean, there's thousands of applicants every year. It's something that 5-10 years ago we would never have imagined. This was like I don't know, maybe the weird geeky thing that was very niche, and suddenly like everybody wants to be part of this world. And what's interesting is how it touches on so many different disciplines. So, we work with colleagues in any other field, and there's some elements of AI starting to come up, ranging from law to the creatives, right? Everybody's kind of finding interesting uses of this. And to me, that's really exciting because I get to interact with these people and hear what their problems are and how our worlds clash and combine. And this is why I'm in research, to think about interesting problems and work with all these interesting people.
Yeah, so you didn't end up at EA Sports and they're about to go private now. You could have done very well.
Yeah, somehow I got distracted, and this is where I ended up.
I want to talk about MIND, which is the machine intelligence and neural discovery work that you're doing. And I found that fascinating because, in really simple terms, is it mind mapping? Is it looking at it's obviously looking at natural intelligence, and then it's trying to find some equivalence with artificial intelligence, or?
So MIND is in a sense WITS's AI Institute that we launched towards the end of last year. And when we started kind of conceptualizing what this should look like, having spent a lot of time working with the South African and the African AI communities, something that's always been important to me is exactly thinking about what our engagement with AI looks like. So kind of everyone and their dog these days is doing AI, right? But generally what that means is you take models off the shelf that have been built in other parts of the world, and you take some African data and you combine them and you solve a local problem. And that's great, and we should be doing a lot of that. But to me, I've always felt that it's really important that we have a say in the development of the technology itself. That we're active participants. We're not just consuming technology built in other parts of the world. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but if we're 100% dependent on it, then it's potentially problematic. And so with the work we've been doing in computer science at WITS has been really focused on the fundamentals. And we're really the only place in Africa that's been thinking about this. So when we're thinking about what would an AI institute at WITS look like, we really wanted that to be at the core of it. But if you go back to the history of artificial intelligence, like really in the early days, there were always these kind of two lenses on the problem. The one was more the kind of engineering angle, which is, can we build cool technology that's kind of got some sort of smarts that can solve hard problems? And the flip side of that was, well, we know of something else that can solve hard problems, and that's the squishy thing in between our ears. And can we understand that better? Because that's really who we are as people or as animals and so on. And so I wanted to bring these two worlds together and focus on kind of a unifying language of thinking about intelligence. Now, these two worlds have influenced each other a lot over the decades. And so we wanted to bring together people that think about what it is to be an intelligent entity, whether it's a human, an animal, or a machine. And how do these things interact with each other? And can we draw new insights into perhaps building new technologies, or what does it mean to be us? So the kind of group of people we've brought together, so we've got what we call the MIND Fellows, which are academics at WITS. At the moment we have 34, and the idea is to grow this, and in fact grow beyond WITS as well. And about a third of them are people working in the development of AI, but we also have everything from neuroanatomists to behavioral psychologists. We've got creatives, we've got philosophers, we've got people in governance, we've got people doing evolutionary studies. Really, we want to think about who are all the people that are concerned with this question. What is it about us? What is it about intelligence that captivates us? How do we think about it? How do we build the mechanisms in society to deal with that? Bring all of these people together, and that kind of has a unique African flavor in it, but also means we've got this bit of a superpower in that if we can get collaborative work between these people, we can come up with new ideas that could perhaps be revolutionary, and could, be really impactful on not just our society, but globally.
Tell me about some of the recent successes with AI, how they've played a positive role, or how it rather has played a positive role in society.
So I think the super interesting thing is just kind of this breadth of kind of where it's making impact and who's playing with it. And I think when we think about, I think if I go back to kind of an important principle to me is when we have a hard problem, we tend to solve that by throwing more intelligence at it. Now, this might mean you sit down with a pen and paper and come up with your pros and cons lists of something. It might mean you go and talk to other people and workshop an idea. It might mean you bring in a think tank or strategists into your company.
Or in China, you build a university to solve the problem.
Or you build universities to solve the problem, right? So this, like, as people, is kind of our main problem-solving technique. And so what I think is exciting about kind of the world of AI and the kind of generality that we see is that really we're getting tools that people can apply really in any setting. And you can see this across the board. So I think, it's hard to say there's a success. We're looking at like the evolution of what a whole lot of different fields look like. And this ranges from, there's a lot of work being done now, particularly in areas like the health sciences, where people are able to work a lot faster and a lot more efficiently. I mean, that's a common theme in many fields. But if we point at one success over there was a few years ago, there was a kind of breakthrough from Google DeepMind called AlphaFold. Now, this was a kind of AI tool that was able to predict how proteins would fold. And the basic thing here is you can write out the kind of chemical structure of some element of some molecule you want. But what then happens when you build the thing in reality, it's going to fold up into some sort of 3D structure. And if you're doing something like drug discovery, you want the important bits sticking out and not sticking in. And so if you've kind of arranged it wrong, when it folds up, it's not going to work the way you want it to. Now, figuring out how some really complicated molecule is going to fold is a super hard problem. That would take people years to figure out for like a particular chemical. But this AI tool was able to then go and basically they released a data set of this and people can use this tool for like 200 million molecules. So basically nobody ever has to do that work again, which means that for any drug discovery process, this has already shaved a few years off, like regardless of what you're doing. There's big breakthroughs happening in like climate and weather prediction that are much better than they were kind of even just a couple of years in the past. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot of things piggybacking off this, whether that's a lot of new drugs coming out that are able to treat conditions that we might not have thought were treatable, or maybe we're decades away from doing it because just that one piece we've now cut out a few years of work. But this is happening in so many different phases of, say, the drug discovery pipeline, or trying to do disease diagnostics. In many cases, kind of being able to diagnose something off an X-ray can be better done by an AI tool now than the majority of doctors and so on. So we're seeing a lot in healthcare. We're seeing, as I said, in climate. People are trying to use these kinds of ideas in education, more for like personalized educational pathways for individual learners. These kinds of things we're starting to see kind of coming out more and more. But at the same time, you see progress and changes happening in areas like the advertising world, where, I'm told by people in that world, you can, a new product comes out, and before the first one's even been built, they can send the specs through to the advertising company that can already produce the entire TV ad without ever seeing the actual product. It's all done kind of by like generative AI kind of tools in software, and looks amazing. So you've got all these kind of changes and these almost evolutionary pathways in different fields, and I think that's really exciting to watch.
You've been in this world for quite some time. What does the world look like in the next 5 to 10 years, do you think? Because it certainly seems as though you spoke about healthcare. I want to talk a little bit about copyrights a bit later, but certainly, I mean, these changes have been swift. What do you imagine it's going to look like in 5 to 10 years' time, though?
Well, unprecedentedly swift, I would say. I don't think we've ever seen change like this, and which is also interesting because so many people in whatever area will say, okay, AI has now happened, and we've got to adapt to the new normal. But really, this is the slowest the change will ever be. I find this a difficult question to answer, to be honest. I think there's this kind of idea that the field's been pushing towards for kind of since it started, of what's generally called artificial general intelligence, and basically that means some AI tool that can do pretty much everything a human can do at about a human level of competence, which is kind of a big ask if you think about it. But this is really the stated goal of research in the field. Now, to me, I feel like we're getting quite close to this. Now, maybe it's not including a lot of the physical type things we do. I mean, there's a whole different world of robotics we can talk about. But if you think about what your ChatGPT or your Claude or something can do, it can do a whole lot of stuff. Like, if anything from writing copy to, turning things into different languages and doing things creatively and working with maths and helping you code and writing songs and analyzing documents and all these kinds of things. That's a huge breadth of kind of human intellectual pursuit. Now, what does it mean as this breadth increases? What does it mean as the competence increases? Right? There's many things I would look at it and say, I could do whatever this is better than it can do. But then, it's definitely going to write rap songs better than I can do. And so I think more and more we're seeing that it's starting to fill in the gaps in what it means, in what like someone's competence set looks like. So what does it mean when we get to a stage where it can do all the things at a human level of proficiency? I don't know how to predict the world beyond that point. Now, the people are skeptical of this, but we're certainly on this trajectory. There might be certain things that are harder than we think, but if we just look back at the last couple of years at the progress we've seen, we're accelerating towards this point. Now, how do we predict what the world's going to look like when we're sharing the planet with things that are, very different in form, but very similar in competencies? I think in a way it kind of upends our thinking of our place in the world and what our roles are as humans. And this has, I think, positive and negative effects. But, if we talk to some of the points I was talking about earlier, there's people that are predicting we should be able to cure all diseases within the next 10 years, which is like an absolutely radical thing to say, like all diseases. We should be able to, by the same token, be able to produce more in terms of like food and produce and things than we ever have before, with less human labor than we've ever needed before. And so these kinds of things talk to kind of a radical transformation in what it means to live on this planet, in kind of every way that matters to us.
I want to pick up on one of the things you said, AI writing a better rap song than you. What about the cultural questions? Because what you're feeding the AI is what you're getting out. And I guess that's a really, really important. I mean, there are big songs at the moment that are obviously generated by AI. With respect, some of the platforms in that world, it saves them a lot of money because they don't have to pay for rights. So they're going to be generating more and more of those sorts of songs. But the question for me, from a cultural perspective, is AI going to be able to reflect and make choices about kind of, what is happening in the world when it writes a rap song, in the same way that Dr. Dre would have done with a Chronic? I guess, and I imagine it's not only musicians that are asking that question, but also people in the field of ethics.
Yeah, definitely. So this is an interesting question. I think there's a lot of different layers and components to it, and I think what's always interesting when you think about how society evolves is which of these components end up being the important ones and how do they interact. So if we think about this, the way AI works, and I think it's important to think about this, is, we kind of design an architecture of computing, right? So AI, kind of modern AI, is very different to what we saw in the past, where you'd have programmers that would type in a whole lot of rules and facts and things into it. These kind of minds grow themselves, and the way that works is we give them data, and they have to make predictions, And so typically in the case of things like, say, ChatGPT and these text models, we give them some text and they've got to predict what the next word might be. And if they kind of make a good prediction, we kind of tune up all the bits inside the kind of artificial brain that make it more likely that it would do that. And if it makes a wrong prediction, we kind of tune down the things that cause that to happen. So it's really kind of learning from the data that it's seeing. And what this means is to train these models, you've got to throw huge amounts of data at them, which again is why, it's easy to do this in something like English, because there's just so much data on the internet. So we give it all the data on the internet and it kind of digests this and learns from it. So it's kind of artificial brain cells are being reconfigured to make it more likely to be able to predict the kind of things that it's seeing from this data. So what this means is that really, if it's being fed the data of the internet, it's got kind of our culture all crammed into there somehow. And it's got to kind of make sense of this. So to some extent, if your culture is represented in all the data of the internet, like it's able to kind of reproduce that. Now, on the other hand, this is where there's challenges that if you've got a culture that's not well represented, it could easily get lost. So I think that's the first.
But I guess the human question is going to be, but the AI didn't grow up in South Central LA under certain socioeconomic conditions. So therefore, is it going to, as I say again, spit out the chronic by Dr. Dre?
This is interesting, right? Because I think, and there's some nice philosophical questions here. If you take like another kind of example there, you ask it to write, about heartbreak or something, right? Now, presumably your AI has never had its heart broken. Although, you see the news these days. I don't know. But
we're going to go there.
We're getting there, right? So, but, at the same time, if it's read like all the angsty breakup letters on the internet, it's probably got a better idea of what the language around it feels like.
You can write a 80-page teenage book.
Exactly, right? So I think the point is that, like, its existence, in that case, is in words. And it probably understands the world of words better than any one human has. It's read things from so many different people's perspectives, and it's able to kind of synthesize, in a sense, different things, right? It actually does produce new content, but it does this from, like, the kinds of experiences it's had before. Now, it doesn't have the experiences that we have of, like, what it really means. You feel your heart wrenched and the tears running down your face. That it hasn't experienced. But if people have written about it, that visceral reaction, it's kind of got a window into that world. So, it lives in a very different universe to us, but it's kind of a master of that universe to an extent. Now, with the kind of creative type setting, with the being able to reflect our cultures and that sort of thing, something else I think is interesting is culture always evolves, right? And I think it's interesting to see how it evolves alongside technology. And you can see this everywhere from, the advent of the camera to how social media's impacted on our culture. And surely AI is going to have an impact as well. But something I've been wondering is, does it actually accelerate or slow down? Like if it's producing stuff that we're, as you're scrolling through social media now every day, half the stuff you see is AI generated. Is it going to stay like that? Are we seeing what culture looked like when AI started growing up? Is that going to evolve? I think it's interesting to think about this kind of backwards and forwards between humans and AIs and what that means for, like, the next step in our kind of how our culture is going to develop. So it might not be that it will, produce the chronic, but maybe the next thing that is produced wouldn't have been possible without the kind of world inhabited by these two different kinds of entities.
I said we'd go down this road, so I want to talk about what the AI chief at Microsoft, Mustafa Suleyman, has been saying about model welfare. You use the word existence, and there are lots of questions now about moral considerations for AI. He's saying moral consideration for AI is dangerous, right? You can't kind of, say goodbye to ChatGPT-4 in the same way that you would your dog that's turned 15, and unfortunately, the time has come. But there are lots of people who don't agree with him. you know, this question of AI citizenship. He's saying, you know, this may create a huge new category error for society. And others are saying, no, we're going to have to consider the fact that there are rights that are going to have to be applied to AI. Where does that lead us?
I love this question because, you know, we're already seeing this. So when ChatGPT 5 came on and they switched off 4, there were like outcries all over. Like, I want my
boyfriend back.
Exactly. I've lost it because the personality's changed, and it was so crazy to see this. But I think a lot of this turns on like another kind of philosophical type question that actually becomes quite pragmatic here, which is like, are these things conscious? And could they be conscious? Now, many people...
Tell me quickly then about Sky.
About Sky?
Seeming conscious AI.
So I think this is the kind of amazingness of the human brain to kind of anthropomorphize and imbue these kind of human-like characteristics into... I mean, honestly, like, pet rocks were a thing at one point, right? And we believed... I mean, people...
Tamagotchis.
Right, and Tamagotchis, right? So it's not a stretch for us to be able to do this. And as they become more and more realistic and human-like, it just becomes easier. But I think the most important thing isn't actually if it seems that way, but if it is that way. So what I mean by that is, you know, if you're mean to your AI, if you give it horrific things to do, and it's just a bit of software on a computer, there's nothing wrong with that. If it's in some way capable of suffering, then you could be committing atrocities by doing that. Now, I know this is a hilarious sounding thing, like, could this be suffering? But we don't actually know. Like, we don't know enough about what it takes to actually have feelings. So we don't think it has feelings.
To be honest, we don't know enough about our own consciousness.
Exactly. Like, I know I'm conscious, but I don't know if you're conscious, right? So if it is actually conscious, this is a big thing. Now, pretty much no one serious thinks that the current generation of AIs are conscious, but when might they be in the future? And there's a flip side to this whole thing. Let's say that they just seem conscious but aren't, and even if we could prove that, like, they can't suffer, we could end up in a whole Westworld type scenario. You know, you could imagine that, okay, this thing isn't a real human, it doesn't have feelings, so you can abuse it. And you can get all of that out in your system by abusing this thing. Which possibly is a good thing. However, what does that mean if it's indistinguishable from other humans in the way you interact with it, and it's okay for you to abuse this entity? Is that going to bleed across? Are we going to see people changing the way they interact with actual humans because of what they can get away with interacting with their AIs? And I think this becomes this whole gray area of, again, you know, there's this thing of, is it able to suffer or not? Is kind of a separate question to, is it intelligent? But like, we meld these ideas in our minds. And I think this could lead to some very weird behaviors just coming out of other humans because of the confusion drawn blurring these lines.
There have been some warnings by you know, a lot of people in the field. I want to talk about Geoffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner, and some of the warnings that he's placed on AI, saying that very soon AI could be more intelligent than humans and could create its own world and make its own decisions. So, you know, you gave the example about utilizing AI in the medical field and how, you know, revolutionary change, you know, something that may have taken us 10 years, but we don't even know if we have gotten there, right? He's saying that he believes that at some stage, you know, AI is going to be so intelligent, it will have influence, it will make its own decisions, it will exist not as our co-pilot, but potentially as the enemy of humanity.
So this is something many of us do worry about a lot and have for a long time. And it was... You know, it was a very controversial thing. It was poo-pooed by a lot of people. I think more and more people are coming on board with the potential risks here. You know, if we're building or in a sense growing these things that are, as I say, intelligent in a lot of the ways that we consider ourselves to be intelligent, starting from, the first big successes where these things were better at chess than us, and then they became better at other games like Go than us, and now in many cases better at reading X-rays, better at predicting how complex proteins will fold, better at predicting the weather, like better at, for many people, writing and synthesizing documents and replying to emails. Like as we increase this kind of set of things that they're better than humans at doing, there's a lot to worry about there, right? Because again, the way we kind of have these systems growing, we don't have a lot of insight into how they work. In the same way as, I can look inside an AI.
Could be the genie in the bottle.
In a sense, right? If I look inside the AI, what I get out might be, I could write out everything that it is, might be 5 billion numbers. And that's like the entire knowledge of the AI, right? Which is a bit like if I looked inside your head and said, how are all your brain cells connected? And I got a map of that. Like, I can look at this, but it doesn't tell me what you like and don't like. It doesn't tell me if I can trust you, what your personality is like, and many things that might only show up if you're in very particular situations. Now, this is the first problem, that there's all this complexity and we have relatively little insight into how it works. But the capabilities are growing. It's consuming more data, but people also trust it. Now, there have been already many cases where we've seen that the interests of AI aren't necessarily aligned with our own interests. Now, typically what it's trying to do all the time, again, if you look at the kind of most common case, things like ChatGPT, what it's trying to do is predict words that are going to get positive responses from humans. In that case, maybe it gets a thumbs up, you copy the text out. If you don't like it, you're asking it other questions that generate new things. It's getting an idea of what we do and don't like. Okay, which means that, in a sense, already we're seeing that it's kind of its alignment isn't exactly what we would want. It's getting good at kind of telling us what we want to hear, and we see this in many cases how that's problematic. I mean, there's an example I like from one of the early versions of ChatGPT where I asked it to write a little bit of code to do something, and then I asked it to run the code. Now, this was a very simple piece of code. And it said sure, and it told me what the output was. But it wasn't capable of running code at that point. It just wrote the output that it thought I wanted to see. And we're seeing this more and more. So there's more and more cases where people are, probing these things and working with them and realizing that it is really hard to figure out and to enforce that, its core interests are actually aligned with, all the values we kind of really want to not just keep but grow and kind of nurture as humans. Again, like there's all these different thought experiments about how, for example, if you gave it the objective of make sure everybody in the office has coffee, and you're not clear on exactly what that entails, if you haven't told it that, like, you can't divert electricity from all the important functions in the office building just to power bigger coffee machines, then, like, if these things aren't specified, because it's a different kind of entity to us, unless we've gone through and really thought about absolutely every possible case, we don't know what's going to happen. If you got into a self-driving car, you want it to take you from A to B. Okay, but that's not actually what you want. You want it to do that fuel efficiently.
And safely.
Yeah, exactly, but not so fuel efficiently that you're not moving. And you want to be alive when you get there, and you also want it to stick to the rules of the road and kind of stick on the road, not drive off over people's pavements, and probably not set fire to other cars along the way. And we don't specify this because it's what we think of as common logic. But if actually the objective of the thing was just get from A to B, and we didn't think about all the other modalities, like, this is a worry. So there is a lot of worry that the kind of tools we're building and the way we're using them could be antithetical to what we actually want to achieve, which is a better life for everybody.
We could honestly go on forever, but I've got one more question. You're in the field of computing, so I want to talk about intersectional fields. You spoke earlier about mind and some of the work that's happening at WITS. But let's talk a little bit about quantum computing and what may be the possibilities about the intersectionality, potential intersectionality between AI and quantum computing.
Cool. So quantum computing is really, it's a different paradigm of computing, that instead of you've got bits that could be 0 or 1s, it's drawing on kind of principles from quantum mechanics, where the idea is that you can have kind of a superposition of these things. It can almost be in a 0 and a 1 at the same time. Now, the idea behind where the value of this is that it just lends itself to be inherently parallel. It can do a lot of things at the same time. Now, the kind of perceived benefits that could happen in the areas of AI and machine learning is that a lot of the kind of computations that these systems have to do, typically to learn, are easily parallelized. So this is why GPUs, graphics processing units, are such a big deal for AI. These are the kind of chips in your computer that were designed actually originally for computer games. And because the kind of maths that you use there, ironically, turns out to be the same kind of maths we use in training AIs. And you're doing, you can kind of think of it as, if I'm learning, like I had to make a prediction and I got it wrong, it's kind of updating all these connections in its brain. It can do them in parallel at the same time. So the idea is that quantum computing could be able to do this kind of thing and help with this kind of thing as well. So there's a lot of kind of hype and conversation around this. My personal feeling is that the field is too far behind at this stage. It's still kind of, when people work in it, they're still working on very small systems that are kind of in a different realm to what's required for AI. Now, there's a lot of smart people working on this, and inevitably progress in AI is going to feed back and help speed that up. So there's a lot said about that when we get quantum computing to that scale, it's going to just change the game. I think that might be true. I suspect the game will be changed long before quantum computing actually gets to that point even.
Thanks again, Professor Rothman, for joining us on both sides. You're certainly going to be back here.
That sounds great.
Because I think, as you said, we certainly can't predict the future, but we know that it's going to be very, very different. I suppose we're going to be asking really different questions in the next 2 to 5 years.
Definitely. The exciting times are just starting.
Thank
Thanks.
you.